first thing Thomas Reed noticed about the boy beside the Ferris wheel was not his expensive coat. It was not the polished black boots that looked as though they had never touched mud. It was not even the silver watch chain hanging from his waistcoat. It was his face. Thomas stopped walking. The other boy stopped too. Around them, the winter fair continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Children screamed happily from wooden rides. A brass band played somewhere beyond the food stalls. Vendors shouted about roasted chestnuts, sugared apples, warm pies, and hot chocolate. Above everything, the enormous Ferris wheel turned slowly against the pale evening sky, its lamps beginning to glow as daylight faded. But Thomas heard none of it. He could only stare. The boy standing 6 feet away had his eyes, his nose, his dark hair, even the small, uneven curve at the corner of his mouth. Thomas raised one hand slowly. The stranger did the same without seeming to realize it. Thomas frowned. The stranger frowned. Then Thomas said, "Stop doing that." The other boy blinked. "You stop." Thomas stared harder. "I was here first. That does not explain why you have my face." Thomas almost laughed. "My face?" "Yes. It was mine before I met you." The boy stepped closer. Thomas did the same. They stood almost nose to nose now, studying one another as though each expected to discover a mask. Thomas reached toward the other boy's cheek. The boy slapped his hand away. "What are you doing?" "Checking." "For what?" "A disguise." The stranger looked offended. Then, unexpectedly, he reached toward Thomas's cheek. Thomas slapped his hand away. "What are you doing?" "Checking." For 1 second, both boys stared at each other. Then they laughed. It was the same laugh that frightened them more than anything else. The smile disappeared from Thomas's face. The other boys disappeared too. A little girl passing with her father pointed openly at them. "Papa, look, twins." The father glanced over. "Don't point, Lucy." "But they are." Thomas turned back to the stranger. "We're not," the stranger said quietly. "No." Neither sounded convinced. Thomas had spent his entire 10 years believing he had no brother. His mother had told him enough about his birth to make one thing clear. There had once been another baby, but that child had not survived. He had never questioned it. Why would he? Until now. The stranger folded his arms. "What is your name?" "Thomas Reed." "Arthur Vale." Something about the name meant nothing to Thomas. Yet Arthur seemed surprised that Thomas did not react. "You haven't heard of my family?" "Should I have?" Arthur looked almost insulted. Thomas shrugged. "My mother says men who expect everyone to know their names usually haven't done anything worth remembering." Arthur stared at him. Thomas grinned. Arthur tried not to. Failed. "Your mother sounds rude. She calls it honesty." Arthur looked him over again. "How old are you?" 10. Arthur's expression changed. "So am I." Thomas swallowed. "When is your birthday?" Arthur hesitated. "February the 17th. The smile vanished from Thomas's face. Arthur saw it. "What?" Thomas did not answer immediately. Arthur stepped closer. "What?" "Mine too." The noise of the fair seemed to fade. Arthur's eyes moved over Thomas's face again. Same age. Same birthday. Same appearance. Thomas forced a laugh. "Maybe every boy born that day looks handsome." Arthur stared at him. "You think you're handsome? My mother says I am." "My governess says vanity is a sign of poor character." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Your governess sounds unhappy." Arthur almost smiled again. Then he noticed Thomas rubbing the side of his left thumb. Arthur looked down at his own hand. He was doing exactly the same thing. This time neither laughed. Before they could speak, a gust of cold wind swept beneath the Ferris wheel. Thomas whistled without thinking. 3 quiet notes, then 2 higher ones, then the same 3 again. It was an old melody his mother hummed whenever she mended clothes late at night. Thomas had heard it since he was small enough to sleep in her arms. Arthur's face went white. Thomas stopped whistling. "What?" Arthur stared at him. "Where did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "That song. My mother sings it." Arthur's voice dropped. "My father used to sing it." Thomas frowned. "Maybe everyone knows it." "No." Arthur shook his head. "I asked my governess once. She had never heard it." "So?" "So my father told me it belonged to my mother." Thomas's stomach tightened. Before he could answer, someone shouted from behind them, "Master Arthur!" Arthur turned. An older woman hurried through the crowd. She wore a dark wool dress beneath a heavy cloak, and despite her age, she moved quickly enough to push two men aside. "Master Arthur, I have been searching everywhere." Arthur sighed. "Mrs. Wren, you cannot simply disappear in a crowd this large. Your father entrusted." Then she saw Thomas. Her words stopped. Mrs. Wren froze. The color drained from her face. Thomas watched her hand loosen around the pair of gloves she was carrying. They fell into the mud. Arthur looked from his governess to Thomas. "Mrs. Wren?" She did not answer. Her eyes moved slowly across Thomas's face. His hair, his eyes, his mouth. Then she whispered something, so softly that Thomas almost missed it. There were two. Arthur heard it. "What did you say?" Mrs. Wren blinked rapidly. "I said, there are two of you standing directly in everyone's path." "No, you didn't," Arthur said. Mrs. Wren bent quickly to collect the gloves. "We are leaving." Arthur did not move. "Do you know him?" "No. You looked as if you did." "I have never seen this boy in my life." Thomas stepped forward. "Then why are you frightened?" Mrs. Wren looked at him sharply. "I am not frightened. You look frightened." Arthur nodded. "You do." Mrs. Wren grabbed Arthur's arm. "That is enough." Arthur pulled back. "Mrs. Wren, now." Something in her voice ended the argument. Arthur looked at Thomas. "Tomorrow," his eyes seemed to say. Thomas understood. He nodded once. Before Mrs. Wren could drag Arthur away, Arthur whispered, "Same place." Thomas whispered back, "Same time." Then they disappeared into the crowd. Thomas remained beneath the Ferris wheel for several minutes. He had almost forgotten why he had been standing there. His mother. She had gone to collect payment from a seamstress shop and promised to meet him beside the wheel. Thomas turned toward the road just as Eleanor Reed appeared between two stalls. She looked tired. A faded brown cloak covered her shoulders. Her dark hair had been pinned quickly that morning, and several strands had escaped around her face. But Thomas smiled immediately when he saw her. "There you are." Eleanor hurried toward him. "I am sorry." Mrs. Bell insisted on counting every coin twice. Thomas took the parcel from her arms. "You missed something." "What?" "I met myself." Eleanor laughed. "You what?" "A boy who looks exactly like me." She smiled, assuming it was some joke. Thomas continued. "Same age." Eleanor's smile weakened. "Same birthday." Her steps slowed. "And he knew your song." She stopped. Thomas noticed. "What?" "Nothing." "Mother." Eleanor looked away. Thomas studied her. His mother was not good at lying. She rarely needed to. He said his name was Arthur. Eleanor's face tightened. Thomas watched carefully. Arthur Vale. The parcel slipped from Eleanor's hands. A glass bottle inside shattered. She did not even look down. Thomas's heart began pounding. "Mother?" Eleanor stared at him. "Where did you hear that name?" "From him." "What did he look like?" "Like me." Her breathing changed. Thomas stepped closer. "Who is Arthur Vale?" Eleanor picked up the parcel with trembling hands. "We are going home." "What?" "Now." "But..." Thomas. He had never heard that tone from her before. Not anger. Fear. They walked away from the fair. Thomas looked back once. The Ferris wheel kept turning. One carriage rose into the sky as another descended. For the first time in his life, Thomas wondered whether perhaps his mother had not told him everything about the night he was born. And if you enjoy mysteries where one small encounter can unravel years of secrets, subscribe to TALEFLIX. And stay with this story, because Thomas had no idea that meeting Arthur beside that Ferris wheel had just awakened a secret several people had spent 10 years trying to bury. That same evening, 12 miles away, Arthur Vale sat opposite his father in the library of Ravenscroft House. The room was enormous. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled inside a marble fireplace. Outside the tall windows, darkness had swallowed the estate. Duke Sebastian Vale sat behind his desk reading correspondence. Arthur had been staring at him for nearly 3 minutes. Sebastian finally lowered the letter. "What is it?" Arthur hesitated. His father was not cruel, but he was not easy either. Sebastian rarely raised his voice because he rarely needed to. "Father." "Yes? Did mother ever have another baby?" Sebastian's hand stopped. Arthur noticed. The letter remained suspended between his fingers. "Why are you asking?" "Because I met someone today." Sebastian put the letter down. "A boy." "What boy?" "His name is Thomas Reed." Nothing. No reaction. Arthur continued. "He looks exactly like me." Sebastian leaned back. "Children often imagine similarities. We have the same birthday." Sebastian's jaw tightened. Arthur watched him. "There was another baby, wasn't there?" Silence. Arthur's stomach twisted. His father stood and walked toward the fireplace. For a few hours, Arthur swallowed. "A brother?" Sebastian's back remained turned. "Yes." Arthur had never heard this. Not once. "What happened to him?" "He died." The answer came too quickly. Arthur stood. "Did you see him?" Sebastian turned. "What? Did you see him die?" "Arthur, did you?" Sebastian's expression hardened. "You will not question me like a magistrate." Arthur lowered his voice. "Then answer me like my father." The words landed harder than Arthur expected. Sebastian stared at him. Arthur almost apologized. Almost. Instead, he said, "I met a boy who has my face, my birthday, and knows mother's song." Sebastian's expression finally changed. Not much, but enough. "What song?" Arthur hummed the melody. 3 low notes, 2 high, 3 again. Sebastian went completely still. Arthur saw it. "You know it." Sebastian walked back to the desk. "That proves nothing." "Then tell me what it means." "It means you are tired." "Father." "Enough." Arthur clenched his fists. Mrs. Wren saw him too. Sebastian looked up. She said, "There were 2. For 1 second, something close to panic entered the Duke's eyes. Then it vanished. "You will not return to that fair without permission." Arthur stared at him. "You believe me?" "I said go upstairs." "You believe me?" "Arthur." The boy turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back. "If Thomas is nothing, why are you afraid of him?" Sebastian did not answer. The door closed. For several minutes, the Duke of Ravenscroft remained motionless. Then he crossed the room, locked the door, opened the bottom drawer of his desk, and removed an old envelope tied with black ribbon. The paper inside had been folded so many times, the edges were nearly worn through. Sebastian unfolded it. He stared at the handwriting. A letter supposedly written by his wife 10 years earlier. A letter that had destroyed his marriage. A letter that told him Eleanor had left willingly. And for the first time in a decade, Sebastian wondered whether he had believed it too easily. Across town, Thomas sat at the kitchen table while Eleanor swept pieces of broken glass from their parcel. He had been silent since they returned home. Finally, he asked, "Was I born alone?" Eleanor stopped sweeping. Thomas continued, "You always told me another baby died." She slowly placed the broom against the wall. "Yes. A boy?" Her eyes filled with something Thomas could not understand. Yes. Did you see him? Eleanor did not answer. Thomas stood. Mother. I heard him. Thomas frowned. What? Eleanor's voice trembled. What? Eleanor's voice trembled. I heard 2 babies crying. Thomas could barely breathe. Then what happened? Eleanor closed her eyes. When I woke again, they told me there was only one. Thomas stared at her. Me? Yes. And the other? Eleanor turned away. They said he died. Thomas whispered. His name was Arthur. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table. Thomas came closer. Who is Arthur Vale? Before she could answer, 3 heavy knocks struck the front door. Eleanor froze. Thomas looked toward it. No one visited them this late. The knocking came again. 3 slow blows. Eleanor's face changed. Go upstairs. Who is it? Thomas, go. But, now. Thomas reluctantly climbed the narrow staircase. He did not enter his room. Instead, he crouched where the upper landing allowed him to see part of the doorway below. Eleanor opened the door. A tall man stood outside. Silver touched his dark hair. His coat was expensive. His expression was calm. Thomas had never seen him before, but Eleanor had. She whispered his name like something poisonous. Lord Gideon. The man smiled. Eleanor. 10 years had passed. Yet he spoke as if they had parted yesterday. Then he asked the question that made Thomas's blood run cold. I understand your son met Arthur today. Eleanor said nothing. Lord Gideon's smile faded. You should have kept him away from that fair. Upstairs, Thomas pressed one hand over his mouth, because suddenly he understood something far more frightening than the possibility that Arthur was his brother. A stranger already knew they had met, and he had come to make certain it never happened again. Lord Gideon stepped into Eleanor's small front room as though he still possessed the right. Thomas watched from the dark landing above. His mother did not invite the man farther inside. She simply closed the door and stood between him and the staircase. You should leave. Gideon removed his gloves slowly. I came because I heard something troubling. You came because you are frightened. That stopped him. Only for a second. Then the pleasant expression returned. Still dramatic after all these years. Eleanor's voice hardened. My son met Arthur Vale. So I was told. Why does that concern you? Gideon glanced around the modest room. The repaired chairs. The narrow fireplace. The sewing basket beside the window. You have made a respectable life for yourself. Eleanor stared at him. Answer me. Gideon sighed. Because Sebastian has spent 10 years trying to forget the scandal surrounding your disappearance. The sudden appearance of a boy who resembles Arthur could create unnecessary questions. Thomas's fingers tightened against the banister. Eleanor stepped closer. Thomas is not a scandal. I did not say he was. You did not need to. Gideon slipped his gloves into his coat. Take him away for a few weeks. Eleanor laughed once. There was no amusement in it. You travel 12 miles after dark to advise me on holidays? I came to prevent foolishness. Whose? Gideon's eyes changed. The warmth vanished. For the first time, Thomas saw the man beneath the manners. Yours. Eleanor did not move. Gideon lowered his voice. 10 years ago, you were wise enough to disappear. Eleanor went pale. Thomas leaned forward. Gideon continued. Do not become foolish now. Eleanor opened the door. Leave. Gideon looked toward the staircase. Thomas pulled back into the shadows. For one horrible moment, he wondered if the man had seen him. Then Gideon smiled again. Think carefully, Eleanor. She pointed toward the street. Leave my house. He stepped outside. Eleanor slammed the door. For several seconds she stood completely still. Then Thomas heard the lock slide into place. He descended quietly. His mother turned. Her face showed immediate anger. You were listening. Yes. I told you to go upstairs. And he told you to take me away. Eleanor looked away. Who is he? No one you need to concern yourself with. Thomas stared at her. That stopped working today. Eleanor closed her eyes. Thomas walked closer. You knew Arthur's name. Silence. You knew Lord Gideon. Silence. And you heard 2 babies crying when I was born. Eleanor slowly sat down. Thomas lowered himself into the chair opposite her. I am not 5 anymore. Her eyes lifted to his. No. Then tell me. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly. There are things I hoped you would never have to carry. Arthur already carries them. That struck her. Thomas continued. He doesn't know his mother. Eleanor swallowed. He thinks she abandoned him. Her face tightened. Who told you that? He did. Eleanor stood so suddenly the chair scraped across the floor. What exactly did he say? That his mother left after he was born. That is a lie. Thomas froze. Eleanor stared toward the fire. I never abandoned anyone. Then what happened? For a long moment, she did not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Your father told me to leave. Thomas's heart thudded. My father? Eleanor looked at him. Sebastian Vale. Thomas did not breathe. Not properly. Not for several seconds. The Duke? Yes. Thomas stood. You said my father didn't want us. I believed he didn't. Arthur's father is my father? Eleanor's eyes filled. Yes. Thomas stepped backward. Everything inside him seemed to tilt. The fine coat. The same face. The same birthday. The same melody. The same father. He whispered. Then Arthur. Eleanor turned away. I don't know. You said there were 2 babies. I was very weak. There had been complications. But you heard them. Yes. Both alive. Yes. Thomas's voice broke. And then? When I woke properly, I asked for both children. She pressed her lips together before continuing. They brought you to me. And the other? They said he had died. Thomas felt cold. Who said it? The physician. Name? Eleanor hesitated. Dr. Harrow. Thomas remembered nothing about the name, but he remembered Lord Gideon's face. Did father tell you to leave before or after? After. How? A letter. Do you still have it? Eleanor looked toward the small wooden chest beneath her bedchamber doorway. That answer was enough. At Ravenscroft House the following morning, Arthur was not permitted outside. Mrs. Wren had been instructed to remain with him. Arthur did not complain. That worried her more than anger would have. He sat by the nursery window pretending to read. Mrs. Wren sewed near the fireplace. After several minutes, Arthur said, Was Thomas my brother? The needle stopped. No. Arthur looked up. You answered too quickly. Mrs. Wren resumed sewing. I have already told you. You told me nothing. Master Arthur, you said there were 2. Her hand began trembling. Arthur closed the book. My father said another baby died. Mrs. Wren's eyes remained lowered. Then your father has answered you. No. He repeated what someone told him. Mrs. Wren looked up sharply. Arthur saw fear. Not guilt alone. Fear. Who told him? I don't know. Mrs. Wren. She stood. That is enough. Arthur rose too. Why is everyone afraid of one boy? Before she could reply, footsteps sounded outside. The door opened. Lord Gideon entered. Arthur watched Mrs. Wren's face. She became still. Too still. Gideon smiled. There is my favorite nephew. I am your only grandnephew. A technicality. Arthur did not smile. Gideon looked at Mrs. Wren. May I speak with him? Mrs. Wren hesitated, then left. Arthur waited until the door closed. Gideon walked toward the window. I hear you made a peculiar friend yesterday. Arthur's stomach tightened. How do you know? News travels. That quickly? When it concerns Ravenscroft, yes. Gideon turned. You must be careful, Arthur. There are people who would exploit your father's position. Thomas didn't ask for anything. Perhaps not yet. He didn't even know who I was. Gideon gave him a patient smile. That is what clever people arrange. Arthur studied him. My father says my brother died. Gideon said nothing. Arthur continued. Did you see him? See whom? My brother. Gideon's eyes hardened for the smallest fraction of a second. Then he laughed. You have inherited your father's talent for uncomfortable questions. Did you? I was at Ravenscroft that night. Arthur's pulse quickened. So, you knew there were 2 babies? The smile disappeared. Gideon stepped closer. You are becoming obsessed with something painful that happened long before you could remember it. Arthur did not back away. That wasn't an answer. No. Gideon bent slightly so their eyes were level. And sometimes, Arthur, refusing to answer is kindness. Then he straightened. You are leaving for school early. Arthur stared. What? Your father and I agree that distance from this nonsense would be beneficial. My father agreed? He will. Arthur understood immediately. Gideon wanted him gone. That was enough to make Arthur decide he was going nowhere. By midday, Arthur had escaped through the kitchen garden. Mrs. Wren would discover it soon. He did not care. He reached the fair before Thomas. The Ferris wheel stood motionless during maintenance while workers checked its wooden carriages. Arthur waited beside the photographer's tent. He had barely been there 5 minutes when Thomas appeared. Neither boy greeted the other. Thomas simply said, Sebastian Vale is my father. Arthur stared at him. Thomas continued, My mother was married to him. Arthur's mouth went dry. No, she said his name herself. My mother was married to my father. Your mother is my mother. Arthur recoiled. You don't know that. She heard 2 babies crying. My father said 1 died. So did my mother. They stared at each other. Thomas's voice dropped. Think about that. Arthur did. Both parents claimed a child had died. Yet here they stood. 2 boys. Same face. Same birthday. Same parents. Arthur whispered, Someone lied. Thomas shook his head. Maybe someone lied to both of them. That was worse. Much worse. A voice called from the photographer's tent. You 2. An elderly man waved them over. I was hoping you'd return. Arthur frowned. The photographer held up a glass plate photograph. Took this yesterday. Finest curiosity I've seen all season. The image showed Arthur and Thomas beneath the Ferris wheel moments after they had met, both staring at each other. Thomas almost smiled. Then Arthur noticed the background. Wait. He took the photograph. Behind them stood Mrs. Wren. Farther back, near a striped stall, was an elderly gentleman in a dark coat. He was not looking at the Ferris wheel. He was staring directly at Thomas. Thomas leaned closer. I've seen him. Where? Near our street. Arthur looked at him. How many times? I don't know. Twice. Maybe 3 times. Thomas pointed. He watches our house. Arthur's stomach tightened. They needed Mrs. Wren. They found her before she found them. Arthur intercepted her near the edge of the fair. She looked ready to collapse from relief and fury. Master Arthur. He held up the photograph. Who is this? Mrs. Wren glanced at it, then froze. Thomas saw recognition immediately. You know him? She looked around nervously. Not here. Who is he? Arthur demanded. Mrs. Wren lowered her voice. Dr. Harrow. Thomas's heart slammed against his ribs. My mother's doctor. Mrs. Wren stared at him. Arthur looked between them. The doctor who delivered us? Mrs. Wren's eyes filled with tears. Neither boy missed the word Arthur had used. Us. She took the photograph. He was supposed to have gone abroad years ago. He hasn't, Thomas said. He's been watching my house. Mrs. Wren pressed one hand against her mouth. Arthur stepped closer. Tell us what happened. I cannot. Why? You do not understand. Then make us understand. She shook her head. Arthur grabbed her hand. Did my brother die? Mrs. Wren looked at Thomas. Her face broke. She began to cry. That was answer enough. Thomas whispered, "We were both alive." Mrs. Wren covered her face. Arthur felt something inside him collapse. "You knew. I was young. You knew. I was frightened." "Of whom?" She lowered her hands. Before she could answer, another voice came from behind them. "Arthur." "Lord Gideon." Mrs. Wren stepped backward. The terror on her face was unmistakable. Gideon approached calmly. "There you are." Arthur looked at Mrs. Wren, then at Gideon. And for the first time, a thought entered his mind that frightened him more than anything else. Mrs. Wren was not afraid of the truth. She was afraid of him. That evening, the boys met again. This time, Thomas brought something wrapped in cloth. They sat behind an old storage shed near the fairgrounds. Thomas unfolded the fabric. Inside lay a tiny silver bracelet. "My mother keeps it hidden." Arthur stared. There were initials engraved into it. TV. Below them, a date. February 17th. Arthur pulled a chain from beneath his shirt. Hanging from it was his own baby bracelet. AV. Same silver, same pattern, same date. Thomas touched the engraving. "No one does that by accident." Arthur's voice was quiet. "No." They sat in silence. Then Thomas said, "There must be records." Arthur looked up. "Where?" "At your house." Arthur thought of Ravenscroft, of the sealed nursery wing his father had never allowed him to enter. "There is an old nursery." Thomas looked at him. "When?" "Tonight." They entered Ravenscroft through a servant's passage after midnight. Arthur knew which corridors creaked. Thomas knew how to move without making sound. Together, they reached the abandoned East Nursery. The door was locked. Arthur had stolen the key. Inside, dust coated everything. White sheets covered furniture. Moonlight entered through tall windows. Thomas walked slowly across the room, then stopped. Two pale rectangles marked the floor, areas where sunlight had faded the carpet differently. Two cradles had once stood there. Arthur found a cupboard filled with old household ledgers. Thomas searched the desk. Minutes passed. Then Arthur heard him inhale sharply. "Arthur!" Thomas held a thin leather book. A nursery register. The pages were brittle. They turned to February. There it was. Arthur read aloud. "Male child, born 2:11 in the morning." Thomas pointed beneath it. Another line. "Male child, born 2:18. Both had the same parents. Sebastian Vale, Eleanor Vale." Arthur searched farther down. No death. Thomas swallowed. There should be one. There isn't. The truth stood between them now. No more guessing. No more coincidence. Thomas whispered, "We are brothers." Arthur stared at him, then shook his head slowly. "No." Thomas frowned. Arthur touched the two birth entries. "We're twins." A floorboard creaked somewhere below. Both boys froze. A door opened in the corridor. Then came Lord Gideon's voice. "Arthur?" The boys looked at each other in terror. Another voice answered from below. Old. Male. Nervous. "You said the boys knew nothing." Arthur's eyes widened. Thomas recognized the voice from nowhere. But the name Gideon spoke next made his blood turn cold. "Lower your voice, Dr. Harrow." The boys stared at each other. The physician who had declared one of them dead was inside Ravenscroft House, and Lord Gideon had brought him there. Arthur grabbed Thomas by the sleeve and pulled him behind the old wardrobe. Neither boy breathed. Below them, footsteps crossed the corridor. Dr. Harrow's voice came again. "You said this would remain buried." Lord Gideon answered quietly. "It remained buried for 10 years. And now? Now 2 boys with the same face have begun asking questions." Arthur felt Thomas's hand tighten around his wrist. Gideon's footsteps stopped directly outside the nursery door. Arthur's heart pounded so loudly he was certain the man would hear it. Then Dr. Harrow said, "I told you this was madness from the beginning. You accepted the money. I was desperate. You were obedient." A pause. Then Harrow whispered, "There were two healthy boys." Thomas shut his eyes. Arthur stared into the darkness. There it was. Not a suspicion, not a half-truth. A confession. Gideon's voice hardened. "And you were paid to make certain Ravenscroft believed there was only one." Arthur's stomach turned. Thomas leaned close and mouthed, "Why?" Arthur shook his head. They needed to hear more. Dr. Harrow spoke. "The woman nearly died that night. Eleanor survived. Barely. And that complicated things." Arthur's entire body stiffened. Gideon continued. "Sebastian was downstairs waiting. Eleanor was unconscious. The servants were confused. The snow had cut the estate off from the village. There was never going to be a cleaner opportunity." Thomas looked sick. Harrow answered, "You told her one child had died, and Sebastian was told the other had." Arthur covered his mouth. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. Each parent had believed one son was dead. But why send one child away? Why destroy the marriage? Dr. Harrow asked the same question. Why did you need them separated at all? Gideon laughed softly. After 10 years, you still ask foolish questions. Eleanor knew about the accounts. The silence that followed felt enormous. Thomas frowned. Accounts? Gideon lowered his voice. She had begun asking where the tenant relief money was going. Arthur's eyes widened. His father had spoken often of the estate relief fund. Money intended for widows, injured workers, and poor tenant families. Gideon continued. She found 3 payments carrying Sebastian's signature. Forgery, Harrow said. Yes. And she knew they were yours. She suspected. She planned to tell him. After the birth, Arthur slowly understood. Eleanor had discovered Gideon stealing from the estate. If she told Sebastian, Gideon would be ruined. Thomas leaned closer to Arthur. But before either could hear more, something struck the floor. The nursery register. Thomas had left it too close to the edge of the desk. It fell with a sharp slap. Silence. Below them, Gideon stopped speaking. Arthur's blood ran cold. A floorboard creaked. Then another. Someone was coming upstairs. Thomas whispered, "Window." Arthur pointed. Too high. Footsteps approached. They had seconds. Thomas grabbed the register. Arthur pulled open the wardrobe. They climbed inside and shut the doors just as the nursery door opened. Through a narrow crack, Arthur saw Gideon enter. Dr. Harrow followed. Gideon looked around. His eyes stopped on the desk. The dust had been disturbed. He walked toward it, then toward the wardrobe. Thomas's breath trembled beside Arthur. Gideon reached for the handle. A voice thundered from the corridor. "Gideon!" Everyone froze. "Sebastian!" Gideon's hand dropped. The Duke entered. "What are you doing here?" Arthur saw Gideon's expression change instantly. Calm returned. Harrow requested a private meeting. Sebastian looked at the doctor. "I was told you had left England." Harrow could not meet his eyes. Sebastian's suspicion deepened. "Why are you in my nursery?" No one answered. Then Thomas moved. Just slightly. The wardrobe creaked. Sebastian looked toward it. Arthur opened the door. His father's face changed. "Arthur?" Then Thomas stepped out behind him. For several seconds, Sebastian stared at the 2 boys. His eyes moved to the register in Thomas's hands. Arthur said, "Father, there were 2. Sebastian went still. Thomas handed him the book. Sebastian read. The first entry, then the second. His face drained of color. He looked at Harrow. "Tell me this is false." Harrow began trembling. Gideon interrupted. "Sebastian, children misunderstand." Silence. The single word shook the room. Sebastian stepped toward Harrow. "Did my second son die?" The doctor stared at the floor. No. Sebastian's face changed. It was not rage. Not yet. It was grief. 10 years of it arriving at once. He turned toward Thomas. Thomas did not move. Sebastian stared at him, as if afraid that touching him might make him disappear. You are... Thomas swallowed. I think so. Sebastian stepped forward, then stopped. He seemed suddenly unsure what a father was allowed to do after being absent for 10 years. Arthur had never seen his father look helpless before. Thomas whispered, "My mother thought you sent us away." Sebastian looked up sharply. What? She has a letter. Gideon turned toward the door. Arthur noticed. Don't let him leave. Sebastian moved immediately. Gideon stopped. For the first time, the man's polished calm cracked. You have no idea what these boys are suggesting. Sebastian's eyes hardened. I know enough to hear Eleanor say it herself. They reached Eleanor's house before dawn. Sebastian stood outside the door for a long time. Arthur and Thomas waited behind him. Thomas finally knocked. Eleanor opened it. She saw Thomas first, then Arthur, then Sebastian. The color left her face. For 10 years she had imagined this moment. Perhaps she had imagined anger. Perhaps tears. Perhaps revenge. But when she finally saw her husband again, she simply whispered, "You." Sebastian answered, "Eleanor." Thomas stepped aside. Neither adult moved. Then Eleanor's eyes went to Arthur. She looked at him properly. Her hand rose to her mouth. Arthur stood very still. He had spent 10 years imagining a mother who had chosen to leave him. Now the woman before him looked as though seeing him might break her. Eleanor whispered, "Arthur?" He nodded. She crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to her knees before him. Her hands hovered near his face. She did not touch him until he moved closer. Then she held him. Arthur stiffened. Only for a second. Then he buried his face against her shoulder. Eleanor sobbed. Not delicately. Not quietly. She cried like a woman mourning 10 years all over again. Thomas looked at Sebastian. The Duke's eyes were wet. Thomas had never imagined Dukes cried. Sebastian turned away. Eleanor finally released Arthur. Then she looked at Sebastian. The tenderness vanished. You told me to leave. I did not. You sent me a letter. You sent me one. Silence. Eleanor stood. What did mine say? That you could not bear this house, this marriage, or me. Her face twisted. My letter said you blamed me for the dead child and never wished to see me again. Sebastian closed his eyes. Thomas whispered, "Show him." Eleanor retrieved the letter from the small chest. Sebastian removed his own from inside his coat. They placed them side by side. Same paper. Same ink. Same careful imitation of handwriting. 2 lies, designed to point in opposite directions. Eleanor stared at them, then at Sebastian. Who? Arthur answered. Gideon. Sebastian looked at him. Arthur told them everything they had overheard. The stolen relief money. The forged signatures. Eleanor slowly sat. I knew. Everyone turned to her. Before the birth, I found discrepancies in the estate accounts. Money meant for tenant families was disappearing. Sebastian's expression darkened. I asked Gideon about it. He told me I was tired, confused. You never told me. I meant to. After the children were born. She laughed bitterly. I thought we had time. Sebastian looked at the forged letters. He made certain we didn't. By morning, Gideon had vanished from Ravenscroft House. So had 3 account ledgers. Sebastian knew immediately where he would go. The winter fair. A private coach was scheduled to leave from the northern road beside the fairgrounds before noon. Gideon intended to disappear. They found the grounds crowded. Families filled the paths. Music played. The Ferris wheel turned above them, exactly as it had on the afternoon Arthur and Thomas first met. Arthur spotted him first. There, Gideon moved quickly through the crowd carrying a leather case. Sebastian followed. Eleanor came behind him. Thomas and Arthur ran around the opposite side. Gideon reached the coach, then stopped. Dr. Harrow stood beside it. Gideon's face hardened. "What are you doing?" Harrow looked exhausted. "Ending this." "You spineless fool." Sebastian arrived. The crowd began noticing. Gideon straightened. "Sebastian, you are making a spectacle." "You forged my name." Gideon smiled. "Prove it." Eleanor stepped forward. "You forged mine too." An accusation from a woman who vanished for 10 years? Whispers moved through the crowd. Gideon raised his voice. "This woman abandoned Ravenscroft. Now she returns with a child conveniently claiming to be Sebastian's son." Thomas flinched. Arthur moved beside him. Then Harrow spoke. "He is Sebastian's son." Gideon turned. The doctor continued. "I delivered both boys." The crowd went silent. Both lived. Sebastian's jaw clenched. Harrow looked at Eleanor. "I told you one died." Then at Sebastian. "I told your household the other died." Gideon hissed. "Enough." Harrow shook his head. "No." He pointed at the leather case. "The ledgers are inside." Gideon grabbed the handle. Sebastian took the case from him. Gideon resisted. For a moment the two men stared at each other. Then Gideon let go. Sebastian opened the case. Inside were the missing estate ledgers, forged signatures, false transfers, payments to Harrow, 10 years of theft and concealment. Gideon looked around at the crowd, at the tenants whose money he had stolen, at the servants who had trusted him, at the two boys he had separated. For the first time, he had no explanation left. The constables stationed at the fair approached. Gideon said nothing as they took him away. Arthur watched him disappear into the crowd, then turned to Thomas. "That was disappointing." Thomas blinked. "What?" "I expected him to run." Thomas smiled. "I hoped he would. I wanted to see Father chase him." Sebastian heard. "I am standing here." Both boys looked at him. Then, unexpectedly, Sebastian laughed. It was a small sound. But Arthur could not remember the last time he had heard it. The difficult part came afterward. Truth did not repair 10 years in one afternoon. Thomas moved temporarily to Ravenscroft with Eleanor. Arthur suddenly had a brother in his room, at his table, beside his father. At first, Arthur hated how much everyone looked at Thomas. Servants whispered. Sebastian wanted to know everything about him. What books he liked, what food he hated, whether he could ride, whether he had ever been ill. Arthur knew it was natural. It still hurt. One evening, Thomas found him sitting alone in the old nursery. "You're avoiding me." "No. You've avoided me all day." Arthur stared out the window. Finally, he said, "Everyone wants you now." Thomas frowned. Arthur continued. "Father looks at you as though he's trying to recover 10 years in 10 minutes. Thomas sat beside him. "You think I am replacing you?" Arthur said nothing. Thomas looked down at his hands. "I thought the opposite." Arthur turned. "What?" "I thought once he had you, he wouldn't need me." Arthur frowned. "That is stupid." Thomas looked offended. "You just said the same thing." "Yes, but mine sounded reasonable." Thomas shoved him. Arthur shoved back. Then both laughed. After a moment, Arthur said quietly, "You cannot replace me." Thomas answered, "I don't want to." Arthur nodded. "Good." Then he smiled. "Because I cannot replace you either." Thomas grinned. "Especially since I am more handsome. You have my face." "Exactly." Sebastian and Eleanor did not pretend nothing had happened. One evening, beneath the long windows of Ravenscroft's library, Sebastian said, "I should have searched for you." Eleanor looked at him. "I should have come back and demanded the truth. I believed the letter because I was hurt." "So did I." Sebastian took a slow breath. I cannot ask you to forget 10 years. No. I cannot ask you to forgive them tonight. No. He looked toward the doorway where Arthur and Thomas were arguing over a chessboard. Then back at her. But may I ask for the chance to know you again? Eleanor was silent. Then she nodded. Yes. It was not a grand reconciliation. It was something more important. A beginning. Several weeks later, the four of them returned to the winter fair. The Ferris wheel was turning. Thomas stood beneath it holding 2 tickets. Arthur looked at him. You bought those? Father did. Then why are you holding them as if you've accomplished something? Thomas ignored him. They climbed into the carriage together. Below, Sebastian and Eleanor watched. The wheel began rising. The fair grew smaller beneath them. Lanterns became dots of gold. Thomas looked across at Arthur. 10 years. Arthur frowned. 10 years what? Thomas smiled. That's how late you were. Arthur stared. I was born 7 minutes before you. Exactly. You should have found me sooner. Arthur laughed. You were the one who took 10 years to reach the Ferris wheel. They rose higher. For 10 years, 2 boys had lived separate lives. One had slept beneath the roof of a duke. The other had shared a small home with the mother who loved him. One believed his mother had abandoned him. The other believed his father had rejected him. Both had been taught to mourn a brother who was still alive. And yet all the lies had failed because one afternoon, beneath a turning Ferris wheel, 2 strangers had looked at each other and recognized something no forged letter could erase. Family. Thomas leaned toward the edge. Arthur? Yes? Next year, if we get separated at the fair. Arthur smiled. We meet here. Beside the Ferris wheel? Always. The carriage carried them toward the highest point. Below them, Sebastian took Eleanor's hand. This time, she did not pull away. And above the lights, the brothers who had spent 10 years apart rode side by side. Not because fate had finally remembered them, but because they had refused to stop asking why. If this story kept you wondering what really happened to the twins, subscribe to TALEFLIX for more emotional stories of hidden families, betrayal, love, and secrets that refuse to stay buried.